they may say, like, when you come, if you don't want to wear a mask, you got to sit in this section, or you got to sit in this spillover room, or something like that. But they can define those rules for how you engage that meeting. And, you know, that is in statute right now. So if you don't like that, then what you need to do is you need to talk to senators and representatives in the back there and change that rule. But the rules can't be discriminatory. They can't discriminate on how you participate. And so if, for example, you go to a school board meeting, and if masked individuals are allowed to provide public comment, then that means that unmasked individuals as well need to be afforded the opportunity to provide public comment at that meeting. And as many of you know, there's a school district in the state right now who is not following this law and is basically saying you put a mask on and you can come to the meeting. If you don't have access to that meeting. You put a mask on, you can provide public comment. You don't put a mask on, you don't get to do that. And that would be the violation of the law. And so that's what I want to make sure it's very clear to you. If you have a problem in your school district, you can reach out to me. I can share an email with you from the Attorney General's office relative to that. But the other thing you have to keep in mind is public comment is not a required part of a public meeting, right? You have to have a public meeting, but you don't have to have public comment. Now, is that a good process? I don't think so, but it is part of the process. And when you are providing input into one of these public meetings, you have to think about the role that you play and how you are going to affect the change that you are there to affect. And I often say, and I don't know if you guys are going to like this one either, but I'll just keep talking. I sometimes say, you can either make noise or you can make a change. And truthfully, there's a role for both of those. Sometimes you need people who can make a lot of noise because you need somebody else who can help get the change, because it makes you look really normal, right? You know, if somebody's really noisy. Or some other thing associated with that. So, but there's a role for both. But think about when you go to one of these public meetings, what is it that you are trying to get done, and what is the best way to get it done? Because the goal is not simply, well, the goal may simply to have your voice heard, in which case, then that's all you're going to do. But the goal may be that you want to see and affect a policy change, and you're going to probably be more effective on that if you engage in a more constructive process as you work with that board. Try to think about how you can be persuasive in terms of getting something done there. I told you guys wouldn't like everything I was going to say. And then the next thing that I would say is, when you're engaged in this process, it doesn't happen all at once. Like, it takes time. I mean, I am so grateful that the curtains have been pulled back, right? And we have a visibility into what's going on in our schools. And I'm so thankful that all of you are engaged in the process and you're showing up at school board meetings and expressing your opinions, hopefully in a respectful way in that process. But it won't change because you showed up at 2 school board meetings. It won't change because you showed up at school board meetings for a season. It will change when you consistently make sure that your school boards know what your expectations are, and they know that you will show up and continue to advocate for the things that you believe are important, and when you get to an election, that you will show up as well to vote. It's interesting, one of the districts that has had a number of problems, I actually have photographs of their deliberative session from the school board meeting. There's about 8 people at the meeting, right? And so these are parents who are very upset. They've got hundreds of people on a petition, but the one time when they needed to be engaged, they weren't there. And so you have to show up, you have to do it persistently. I was trying to think of an example of this, and the one that comes to mind is, you'll recall, in New Hampshire, we received a grant for $46 million for charter schools. And you may recall that the legislature, through the fiscal committee, told me no. And so I made them tell me no all the way through the election. Every month I showed up. Every month I continued to say, this is good for our children, this is good for our families. If you want, you can continue to say no to our families. You can continue to say no to our children, and yes to our collective bargaining units, our teachers' unions, who are interested in preserving their monopoly in this system. Now let me give you a little bit of a primer on education pathways here in New Hampshire. We have 4 education pathways in New Hampshire, and this might, for some of you might already have this, but I think this is important to understand because these are distinct. So, in New Hampshire, children between the ages of 6 and 18 under a compulsory education law are required to be in school, otherwise they are truant from school. And when it says they have to be engaged in an education program, the 4 options are they can be in public school, and that includes our public charter schools or our traditional public schools. They can be enrolled in any one of those. The children could be enrolled in a non-public school here in the state of New Hampshire. They are approved by the State Board of Education. We have many great non-public schools in the state, and so they could do that. They may be enrolled in a home education program. And by enrolling in a home education program, they are not considered truant. Ken was telling me I should lean in on this one a little bit, just because people may not know that about me, but so I am a parent of 7 children who all were home educated. And what I can tell you is education, we saw in that video, it's been said a couple times here, parents are the primary educators of their children. And that role needs to be that is the most important thing you can do for your kids, is making sure that they are getting educated. Now that may mean that you reach out and you find other resources to help you, but you own that responsibility. That's another thing that we've seen change through this pandemic, as those the curtains have been drawn back. It's no longer good enough to just put your children on a bus and say, wave goodbye to them, and then wait for them to come back. You need to know what's going on. You need to understand the books they're reading, the curriculum they're reading, the stuff they are working on. And can I tell you something? You need to do that not only because you are interested in to make sure that that somebody's not teaching them something that's going to undermine the values that you are trying to teach your children at home. But you know what? The educational research will tell you that when parents are engaged in the education of their children, the children have better outcomes. They perform better. Because when you communicate to your kid, education is an important thing. Look, Mommy or Daddy's going to spend some time talking about what you've been learning. The kids get those messages. And they say oh, this is important. I better pay attention. I'm going to do it. So those are the 4 types. Oh, and then the 4th one that we have is, and it's a new one, and we can thank our legislators for this, is education freedom accounts, right? So that is the 4th. If your child is enrolled in an education freedom account program, then they are not considered truant between the ages of 6 and 18. Sometimes people get confused about that, because with an education freedom account, you may take that education freedom account and go to a non-public school. You may take that education freedom account and go to another public school in another district. You may take that education freedom account and home educate your children. But it is a separate type of education programming. And now, even within that system, I'm going to get a little wonky now, I want to talk about some of the tools that you have as a parent to weigh in on and advocate for your child. And there's a lot of different things that you can do, but there's a couple of rules that I wanted to focus in on. One of them is RSA 186.11, paragraph 9-C. And you're thinking what? I'm going to repeat that one really slowly, but we can get that. If you just Google RSA 186:11, Roman numeral 9-C. And this is a law that requires school districts to adopt a policy allowing an exception to specific course material based on a parent's determination that the material is objectionable. And you may not know what they're teaching in school, but you know what's objectionable to you. And this law was designed for you. And so what happens is that such a policy has to include a provision that requires the parent to notify the school principal in writing of the specific type of material to which they object, and a provision requiring an alternative. So if you've got something that I don't want my children partaking this, right? I want them out of this. I don't know what you're going to be teaching about, but I find it objectionable, and I don't want my children. You can file a notification with your district, and then you have the ability, when that curricular material comes up, that they have to notify that you're going to be teaching it and provide an alternative option for your child, working with you through that process. So, if you don't want your child exposed to discriminatory teaching or critical race theory, please, for my sake, so I don't have to deal with the complaint later, right? Please notify your school that you find that objectionable and that you want your child excluded anytime that that material or that content is covered in your district. If the content of the material is dealing with human sexuality, the school has to give you at least 2 weeks of advance notice and provide you with the parent access to be able to look at it as well. So they're going to be doing a teaching on sex ed. You notify them, they have to show you the material so you know what your kids are going to be learning. So if you're concerned about gender and early sexualization for some of the younger kids, this is an opportunity for you to weigh in and do that. Okay, there's another law. This one's going to be easy to remember because it's just paragraph D after the first one. So this is RSA 186:11, Roman numeral 9-D. And this is requiring the school district to adopt a policy governing the administration of non-academic surveys or questionnaires to students. And let me just tell you something. You have an individual in this audience right now who has been a staunch advocate to make sure schools don't violate this particular provision and is carefully watching what goes on. So thank you, Anne Marie. And so non-academic surveys, all non-academic surveys require a parental opt-in, not an opt-out. They can say, oh, I'm sorry, did you not get the opt-out? You affirmatively have to agree to take that non-academic survey, and the only exception to that is something called the YRBS, Youth Behavioral Risk Survey. That is an opt-out survey. That's the way it's written into the law. And what you have to keep in mind is, again, be engaged in your children's education. Because oftentimes these surveys have nothing to do with the content of the class that the student is in. And it may be that the administrators in the building don't even know that teachers are using these tools. I mean, and we have seen, in a consumer math class, they were surveying students on gender issues, gender identity issues, and whether or not they wanted, they actually asked the children, if we call home, should we share your non-conforming gender status with your parents or not, right? And you're just like, oh my gosh, like teaching kids to lie to your parents, not a good look. Okay, so those are two tools that are very important for you. If you're concerned about what's going to be going on in that class, if you've got grandkids or anybody else who's in the school system, notify the school. We're going to do questions in a second. Okay. And then I got one more law that I wanted to kind of highlight for you, and that is RSA 91A. Truthfully, I'm not an expert on this, but Norm is here to answer any questions I can't answer. And this is access to government and records and meetings. And so openness, again, as I've mentioned, in the conduct of public business is essential to a democratic society. You know what, I didn't have to make that statement up. That is the preamble to this law. In other words, like that's what it says in 91A1. That meetings need to be open to the public in 91A2. And there are very few exceptions to what is not allowed. And that is, these are the exceptions to a 91A. And so a 91A request, for those of you who don't know, you can make a public records access request to any governmental agency, and they are required by law to provide you with that information. They have 5 days to respond to you, either with the information or to let you know when they can get that information to you. So you have some sense that they haven't lost that request. And I will tell you, 91A requests are something that we frequently deal with at the Department of Education on a regular basis. I was commenting to someone earlier, I have one right now, they want every one of my emails that I have ever written since I've been the Commissioner of Education. They just want all of my emails forever, right? It will be a voluminous delivery, but they're welcome to them, because that is the law. We have an open system. But the things that are exempt, you can't ask for personnel records of pupils, including pupil ID numbers. You can't ask for test questions and answer keys, for obvious reasons, right? They're afraid that maybe you'll share those. You can't ask for teacher certification records. You can ask for a teacher certification status. Are they certified, not certified, what credentials they hold, but not their certification records. And that means, because I've had this question many times, curriculum is subject to right to know, right? We should have curriculum as a transparent thing so we know what's being used in our classrooms. And sometimes, you know, it's important to understand what is the curriculum that is being used. I'll just leave it there. Okay. And then the other thing that is important to know about this 91A law is that the department doesn't have the jurisdiction to enforce it, right? Like the law doesn't have anything there that says, and if somebody doesn't follow it, that the Commissioner of Education gets to come down like a big brick. The Attorney General's office doesn't have that. It is adjudicated in the court. So in 91A7, any person aggrieved by violation of that chapter may petition the Superior Court for injunctive relief. And again, I get a lot of calls saying, can you help me? They're not responding to my 91A. And so you can go to court on this. You can do that with an attorney. You can do that pro se by yourself. I have a number of parents who have been through that pro se process. It's really not that complicated. You know, the Superior Court judges understand that if you're a pro se parent and you're coming in, you may not know all of the different nuances of being in court. And it is interesting, if you hire an attorney, you may be able to recover legal fees if the lawsuit was deemed necessary to enforce the actual compliance with the 91A. So if you have a district that continually is refusing to provide information that you know is subject to 91A, you may find an attorney who'd be happy to take that case because the other side will end up paying. The flip side of that is if you bring a frivolous lawsuit, you may be the one paying those legal fees as well. And again, sometimes people are nervous, well, you know, if I make a 91A, is that normal? Let me tell you, we get them all the time, you know, on all kinds of subjects. So, I mean, I could go on, you know, but, you know, it doesn't matter, like, whatever educational pathway, going back to those 4 pathways, whatever educational pathway you choose for your child, the most important aspect is that you are involved. You know, when parents are involved, again, children's education is better. Children perform better. They have better outcomes in their education. And it's not good enough to simply assume that the school is taking care of everything. So you have to know the content of what's being taught in your class. And I'm just going to share 2 examples of this that I think are important. I spent last weekend reading a YA book. Anybody know what YA stands for? Young adults? Yes, exactly. So it was a book that's targeted at 7th graders. It was being taught to 4th graders. So you have to ask the question about the you know, developmentally appropriate nature of the particular content. But in this book, it was sad to read. There were a number of aspects that I could point to, but one of the things that you observe is that they are teaching children to observe life, to observe the world through a racial lens. People are not individuals, people are their race. And so it's not helpful for those children, especially a 4-year-old, to try and process that and figure out what that's going to look like. I will tell you, in this same book, there was a sexual assault, and they blamed the victim of the sexual assault. I thought that you weren't supposed to do that. But how does a 4-year-old even begin to process that kind of content? So know what the content is that your students are learning from. And then another example that I got, this is again just from last week because they come often, is an 8th grade social studies class. And on the wall in this social studies class is a poster promoting socialism. And they're reading Ibram Kendi's book, stamped in that classroom. Again, age appropriate. Is that the kind of content that we want our children in 8th grade social studies reading? Is it any wonder when kids get further along that they don't understand how to be civil in a civic society? And so know what's being taught in your class. When you're working with your schools, understand that the things that seem to get the most attention from schools are 2. One is they respond to dollars, funding, and in fact that's one of the aspects that EFAs will help because it balances that negotiation. If a parent's not able to get the school to respond to their needs for their child and they say, fine, I'll take my money and I'll go somewhere else, maybe that will cause them to be more responsive to their customers. And the other is transparency, and we've talked about 91A. You pay the bills, and it is your children that are being taught. You are the primary educator for your child, whatever pathway you choose. So know where your money is going, and know what your child is being taught. So thank you for letting me join you today. I appreciate it, and I think Ken is going to keep track of the time, and we're going to maybe do a few questions.
You know, in the beginning you talked about opting out, and then you know the sex education thing. Is that an opt-out thing? Is this YA thing? Is that an opt-out thing? You know, as you find out what's being taught to your kids, can you just walk in and say, "My kid's coming out of there"?
So the way that the law works is the law requires the district to have a policy, and so you will have to file a notification. It says file it with your principal. Say like, when you're dealing with this content, I find it objectionable and I want to opt my student out of that content, is how you would do that. So I would not find, it would be probably inappropriate to just like show up on a certain day and say like, I'm grabbing my kid and I'm taking him out of here. Follow the process at the beginning of the year, or now if you haven't already done it, at the beginning of the year, let them know what you find objectionable. When this content is covered, I want to know about it and we're going to find an alternative, you know, arrangement for my child. Oh, actually, we'll go here and then we'll come over here.
I actually just did that, but I didn't know that I had to do it with a formal letter. I went to the school district at the beginning of the school year because they had sent home SEL was going to be taught, and I said, I don't want him. He's in the 7th grade. He knows from
You're a parent. I got it.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So I went through it, and when I spoke to the guidance office, they gave me the first 3 weeks of curriculum that they were going to be going over. And she said, I'll let you take it home, but I really don't think you should pull it. And I said, thank you. I respected that. I took it home. He learns his social skills from his parents. He doesn't need you to do that. I went back. I said to the principal, I need to pull him from that class. He's not getting a grade for it. You're spending 40 minutes a week teaching him this, that he doesn't need to be there. How do I do this? Do I come pull him for that class? He said, well, we don't have the teachers or an adult in the school at all to cover your only child. I've never heard of this happening before. I said, well, then I'll come to the school and I will watch him for that 40 minutes. Every Monday, that's what I do.
Thank you for doing that.
But
You don't have to.
I didn't know that I had to do it formally. I went to the principal of the school, and he didn't want me to. He kind of struggled with me a little bit. But I showed up that next Monday to do it, and he let it happen.
Yeah, that's the law. They have to follow that.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's great. Good story.
So I've heard a lot about, first of all, thank you for speaking. I've heard a lot about an organization called Brenda and the pods, and I just didn't know if you could, like, not like an in-depth, but can you just explain like a real high level of that?
Sure. So Prenda is a state program that we have rolled out as a result of the pandemic. It is, I refer to it as small group, you know, multi-age, trauma-sensitive learning environment. And essentially what it is a student is going to be in a pod, which is between 5 to 10 students, somewhere between, you know, K and 8th grade. And they will be learning with that cohort of students in person. They do computer work as well, so it's not like there's no computers in the thing. So they use the computer, but they have like, you know, some academic stuff. They do these, you know, projects that they work together with one another. And then they also have these other, you know, kind of longer term projects that they work on. The state is paying for those over time. You know, we have at least the first 2 years are paid for at this point in time. And it is a good program that doesn't affect you know, your local school, because if your local schools were able to opt into Prenda, so your school district might have it. We've only had 5 school districts that are opted into Prenda. Actually, there's a Prenda person in the back there, and then we also have community pods. So if your school district doesn't have a Prenda pod, then you can file an intent to home educate and you can join a pod that way. If you need information about it, it's on the department's website, or you can reach out to me and I can connect you up. But it seems to me it's a little bit like a one-room schoolhouse type of an environment, and a very good learning and structured environment for them. Yes?
Just quickly, so I've tried to get this question answered multiple times and just kind of, so I don't know if
Do my best then.
All right. So if there's no mask mandate in the state, there's no mask mandate in the particular town that you live in, then, I mean, the school department or school itself is owned by the town that the taxpayers pay for, right? So the school board can just literally slap a mask on the kid because they say so when it's not a mandate and it's a town-owned building that doesn't have a mask mandate, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I can answer it for you. So essentially, the authority to do something like that rests with the legislature, right? The legislature is the supreme lawmaking body in the state. The legislature has delegated to the State Board of Education responsibility for creating rules relative to the operation of our public schools in New Hampshire. The State Board of Education, through some ed rules, ED 306.02, subparagraph A and subparagraph D, I believe it is, has delegated to the local school board to make health and safety policies for the district. And it's under that authority that they are using that mask mandate. So the ultimate authority rests with the legislature, goes to the State Board of Education to local school board is making that policy, and that's the legal authority that they have to do that.
Is that just set up now because of what's been going on, or was that something that was already?
No, that's how it's been for quite a long time, yeah.
I have a question from somebody who's asking, so related to that sort of, is how are schools able to usurp 141C? I know that's illegal, so I don't know if that's better for the attorney, but which is basically communicable disease laws that are just reserved for HHS. How are school boards then, again, it's kind of like to what he said, but I understand making rules, you know, even dress codes, but that's a medical device. So school boards can make medical decisions?
Yeah, so it's about health and safety is what it is. And so they have delegated in the rules, in those ED 306 rules, the authority to make rules relative to health and safety in that building. So that's what they're doing. So when you come over to the 141C, that comes into effect more relative to vaccinations. And in fact, if you go to the department's website, we have a technical advisory that we have put out relative to that. And so the vaccines specifically fall under the 141C, which is why none of your students have a vaccine requirement in school. So in public schools, there are a number of vaccine requirements for a student to attend public school today on the books. The COVID-19 vaccine is not one of those, because that's not enumerated in 141C. And so as long as that's not enumerated in 141C, there will not be a vaccine mandate for COVID-19 for students in New Hampshire. So does that help you understand that?
I think so, except that, is that just, you probably don't know this, but that's just a law specific to probably New Hampshire and every state's different?
141C or the...
The delegating health decisions to school boards.
That's unique to New Hampshire. Different states have different structures in terms of what the oversight responsibilities are, but that's how it's been delegated here in New Hampshire.
Thank you.
So I do have a question. I wanted to mention something to the people who had asked the last question. You may have heard in the news, there's an attorney in Manchester who's suing several districts, Epping, Londonderry, Timberlane, over the mask mandate.
Yeah, we're in that.
Okay, I was going to say, give you his name. I've talked to him personally and say he'd probably want to talk to you if you'd be willing to sue your school district.
Going all the way to the back there.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm actually a school board member in
Great.
Vermont.
So your child is so cute.
Yeah, this is one of them. So I've always been on your side from the very beginning of this, and I got a lot of angry parents on that end. So it's interesting to me that they're now pressing back on people coming to school board meetings to fight for this. So my question is, our school was mask choice, and then about 10 days ago, they did a mask mandate. The superintendent actually, not the school board, chose it. So I withdrew one of my children. I'm interested in the educational savings account option. Is that something that I can opt into mid-school year? Or do I need to send another letter to our superintendent to get my child to another district or a private school, or we're homeschooling right now,
So as long as you filed an intent to home educate, that's fine. So now you can continue, you can fill out the application for an education freedom account at any point in time. You've missed the first cutoff was October 2nd, so then you're going to be partially in that program for the rest of this year. But it is a rolling enrollment process that you can enroll in at any time. As well, the Prenda pods are also available on a rolling basis, so you can jump in there at any point that you'd like to also.
okay, thank you.
So anytime, so the way that the public meeting law works is anytime that there's a quorum of members present, that constitutes a meeting. So if a quorum of people get together, then you've got to be really careful what you're talking about. I mean, and I have personal experience with that because in addition to Commissioner of Education, I'm also a water commissioner in the town of Wilton because everybody in New Hampshire has to have a lot of things that they're doing. And there's only 3 of us. So we've got to be really careful if we meet on the street in downtown Wilton what we talk about because it's a quorum, right? So we don't want to engage in any kind of business at all. So anytime there's a quorum, it is a designated public meeting.
So they can make a committee to talk about what is essentially critical race theory, without a quorum, decide what they're going to do, and not keep records about it, and that's okay.
So if there's not a quorum, then it is not a meeting, right? In other words, so it's not an official meeting. So they're allowed to have lots of working sessions and different kinds of things relative to that, but it would not constitute a meeting. And normally jump in if I screw this up at any point, okay? Hey, you had one already, so we're gonna go behind you.
Hi, okay, so I was just, thank you again also for being here. I think it's great to have you here to help with the situation. The legislation number that you had cited earlier, could you repeat that again? For
Sure,
me?
RSA
Yeah,
186, colon, 11, comma, Roman numeral
I got that one, I'm sorry.
9-C.
Okay, that's perfect, thank you. But I was actually looking for the legislation that's passed through for the health, safety of the individuals.
ED 306,
Yeah.
pretty sure it's .02. It's your .02 or .04, and I think it's like,
ED
there's
306.
like an A, a D, and a 22, I think that you'll see there's a
Perfect.
couple of
You
references in
put me
there.
in the right direction, thank you.
Okay,
so
and if you
much.
can't find it, then call me and I'll find you, I'll get it.
No
If I have
problem.
my book in front of me, I'll get you there.
No problem. I have one other question. The
Okay.
statement that the lady on the school board that just made, she said her superintendent overrode the school board?
I was going
How is
to
that?
comment on it. So just so that we're clear, so superintendents work for school boards. So the school boards are the boss of superintendents. And so if you're a school board member and you have to remember that the administration works for you as that oversight body legally.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, we had given the superintendent all powers, if you will, to make a decision on the go because we were having cases, right? So that's what happened. And before I knew it, we got an email one midday saying we're full masks from now on. And then we had a school board meeting that night. I raised Cal. You can watch the video. But unfortunately, we did that. And I would be outvoted if I tried to take any action about that, unfortunately. So that's what happened.
So it's more that delegation going on, right? The legislature, state board, school board, now to the superintendent. Soon the first grade class is going to be making most of the determinations.
Might work out better.
We've been going all over.
Well, so we have bullying statutes in the state of New Hampshire. So the question was, many parents are afraid to express their concerns at school board meetings for fear that school officials or teachers would take out reprisal against their children in the school environment. And so we do have bullying, yes, we do have, laws against bullying. And so if a child is bullied by an educator or an administrator in a system, that would be a cause for complaint to the Department of Education. Is probably the best way to describe that. As well, our educators have what's referred to as an educator code of conduct. And that is germane to their license because educators hold a teacher's license. And so, if they are behaving inappropriately, that could jeopardize their license as well. So you hate to do it though, you hate the thought. I understand you're concerned about the bullying, so I can't intervene until there's an infraction, but at that point the kids are even bullied, that doesn't help, right? It's a poor kid, so. My phone number is on. Yeah. We're going to go all the way back and then we'll come back front. And then Ken's going to give me the hook here because there's other people who have important things to tell you. Yes, you back there, yeah.
I have a question because I'm from Hopkinton and our school board did a retreat up north. Like they went away for the day. probably discuss something.
Well, I mean, there is not a requirement in terms of where they hold the meetings, as long as they notice that they're going to have, the school board will be meeting at a certain place, unless it was a non-meeting. What do you think, Norm?
Meetings.
Yes, it sounds like a meeting.
Sounds like a meeting to me. So
Yeah.
what do I-
So in a meeting, it was required, you have to notice it, in advance, and keep minutes and publish those minutes. Other than, there could be non-public sessions that they seal those minutes, but otherwise it should be public.
So they can make a retreat.
So a retreat is a meeting. If there's a quorum there, it's a meeting.
And you're entitled to attend.
And you're entitled to attend. That has to be public access. You may not be able to attend in person, but you have to have access to that meeting.
So what do I ask for the minutes for that?
That would be appropriate, right? There should be
And
minutes.
then, if there are no minutes, do I, will you file a complaint?
Yeah, I don't think it's, again, the meetings, so public meetings is not in this jurisdiction of the Department of Education. It really falls to the Secretary of State, right? So he's responsible for publicly elected officials and how they meet and whether they follow the appropriate meeting issues and requirements. So I'm not sure what the follow-up would be. But if you want, you can reach out to us and we can connect you over to the Secretary of State. And then there was one more up front here, and then I think I'm getting pulled here.
In relation to what you were talking about, intimidation of the student, if you make a complaint at a school board meeting, now that the FBI has been weaponized against the parents